Uh-oh.
Good morning. My name is Jean Finstein, and this is the January 23rd, 2021 Friends of Wheeling Tour. Today we're back in the Scottish Rite Cathedral. We toured this building back in November, so if you're interested in some of the other parts of this building, just go to our Facebook page and scroll down and you can find that tour. It's a fascinating building. The Scottish Rite had an earlier cathedral on the same site that burned to ground in 1915, and this magnificent building was finished in 1916. The architect was Frederick Ferris, and the contractor was Ralph R. Kitchen, who has built multiple substantial buildings in Wheeling, including the Capitol Theater. So today we're going to have a tour of some window restoration workshop facilities that are being set up by the Roxby Development Corporation and also Adventures in Elegance. And you're familiar with that latter group because Sarl Venter and Becca Corellis have joined us for other tours in the past. So, with that, I'll turn this over to Sarl and we'll see what's going on at the Scottish Rite.
Good morning indeed. It is a very brisk winter's morning in Wheeling, West Virginia, and very appropriately so because we are going to be talking about the traditional ways of making a very public building comfortable for a bunch of people, even in the middle of the winter in Wheeling, West Virginia. Today, in summary, we're going to be looking at the facilities that have made possible to keep people comfortable in this building. So we're going to look at the way this building was heated, very ingeniously, and we're going to look at the other big method of keeping weather out and keeping humans human, which is the windows. You have very large openings in this building, very, very big windows, and we are particularly going to look at the function of the windows, the condition of the windows, and we are going to all be amazed by the fact that they are still operational and working after more than 100 years, and we are going to lust after windows that will last 100 years, knowing that replacement windows today that we buy are functional maybe for 10, 15 years before they need for another replacement. And once we have looked at this, we're going to start off by showing you a discovery. We found a window that was has basically been boarded up and left unused for the last almost 100 years since the addition's been built, and we'll see as close as possible what the original windows look like and what the original condition of them look like. So without further ado, let's start and walk towards our little storage room, and I'll show you what an original window used to look like when it was built. Let's go. So, very quickly, this wall right here is the borders of the old building before the new addition was built. The new addition on this floor has a dining area with a library in front of it. On the second floor it has the women's lounge with bathrooms behind it. So that whole block was built in, Becca, 1926, a resident historian. So before 1926, so for a period of how many years, we had this as an outside wall. After the addition was built, there was a window above this original doorway that was blocked off into a storage room, and that window was never used again, which leaves us with a window in original condition, and that's what we're going to see now. We can go up these stairs and look at that little window that's in original condition. So this again would have been the outside wall. Below us would have been, underneath the windows would have been a series of doors, I presume. But these windows, since that time, has been unaltered, no need to paint it because this was just a storage room. Probably didn't have access to it. So we can assume that these windows have the original finish on it from the beginning. What to show you a few components of this. This is the functionality of the window today that's been unused for all that period of time. Not only does the bottom sash move very well, the top sash doesn't shoot, and it's still finely balanced, not down up at all. I dare you to find a replacement window that will last nearly that period of time. What we don't see here is old growth wood of a very particular species to really withstand the outside conditions of moisture and sun UV, etc., etc. And it's old growth wood, which is really not attainable today. The same species of wood that you would buy today would not have the same amount of urines and would be much, much inferior wood. So there's no beating this material to use. When we look at this window and all of the others in this building, and there are many, we're judging close to 300, is that correct, Jeff?
We're pushing about 150 in this building and 100 plus at the monastery.
Correct. So between the monastery and this building, there is a lot of windows to be restored. Here are your options. If you replace them, which is not the traditional thing to do, it's not an historic thing to do, it's not an economical thing to do, it is not a tax credit thing to do. If you do replace them, then you lock yourself into a cycle whereby every maybe 15, 20 years from now, you're going to replace them again because they don't last that long. The economic impact of that alone is amazing. This same window unit with all its components, these are all balanced. You have a chain that carries the weight. We'll see some enormous weights in the basement, not for this particular window, but for the larger windows. So you have a counterbalance that between the two weights is the same weight as the sash. You have a metal pulley that after 100 years is still relatively squeak-free and no maintenance. In where the two meet, there is a binding sash that keeps, when this is locked, pulls those together and makes a wind-tight seal. Then you have the inner stop, which is removable with these screws so that you can get to these to service them if you need to. If we look at the inside here, not quite so obvious, but there is a pocket here that you can unscrew to get to the weights inside. So should they become unfastened, you can actually get to the window weights to take that apart. It is senseless to replace the system. It's functioned for 100 years. It will function for another 100 years. But it does need some maintenance, especially on the sides of the building that has a lot of weather to it. And that is why, in the basement at the moment, we are in the process, the chaotic part of the process of changing our workshop from 18th Street, where we used to be located, to this basement, so that we are right at the source of where the work needs to take place. At the moment, we are exactly in that location where we don't have the new shop set up yet, and we've already interrupted the old shop, so we have nothing except chaos. But it'll be a short while. The idea is to train a group of people that will be dedicated to do nothing but restore these windows one at a time. So the process basically means that these two sashes will be removed out of the opening. The opening winds out to the elements will be protected. The frame, this will obviously need negligible restoration because it's in such good condition, but the ones exposed to the weather does have. The frame will be stripped of paint and will be repainted. And interestingly enough, we go back to the old linseed-based oil paints because they last so much longer. They're also much thinner, which means that you have so much less abrasive areas that if you have a high buildup of paint, especially of soft paint, which is the local thing, you end up having almost an abrasive surface that causes a lot of friction. This you can see is a very, very thin paint buildup. It doesn't cause any friction surfaces. In some areas, this did not have it. It's not on the weather side of the building. You see there's no metal stripping here that allows for extra wind penetration or disallows extra wind penetration. The larger windows does have some metal seals in it. We will show you some of those. And of course those will be taken out, restored and put back together as far as possible. In some cases they'll be replaced. This process is this is not a new thing. This is done all over the country. There are specialists that specialize in doing only this. The original glass is reused. of course, in great condition. So there is some remanufacturing sometimes. Sometimes you have on the inside sills, on the outside sills, this obviously in great condition, but sometimes these are very badly deteriorated and need some epoxy repair, sometimes even a complete sill replacement. But this whole component is a vital part of making the building last another 50 years, and also to give you a known maintenance cycle. One of the worst things to do from a development point of view is to lock yourself into a situation where you now have a maintenance cost that's out of hand, and it's a cyclical, huge amount of money that has to be spent regularly. So it makes much more economical sense to do the restoration of this correctly so that you have a very long maintenance cycle. So instead of having to repaint every 5 years, if you can bring that to the point where you have to repaint every 15 years, you've just saved a whole lot of money. And
How about the glass itself?
so this is the very good question. So we're inclined to think today, oh, you know, they've got these insulated glass panels. They're two pieces with argon gas in between, and they're just the most wonderful thing. You know, it's economical. You have to have it. In reality, the efficiency coefficient, which is how they measure these things, of the radiation that comes from this building and radiates out the glass to the outside. The difference between a single pane glass and a double pane glass with argon fill is negligible on the scale. Glass is a very poor barrier to radiated heat. In a single form or a double form, it doesn't matter. It's a very poor preventative of heat losing. You can gain much more efficiency by simple mechanisms. Curtains, even interior heavy curtains, even a winter curtain in many cases, that keeps that radiation from leaving. And that is a great segue into the second portion of what we'll be talking about, which is the heating system in general. The heating system in this building, as we've seen many other buildings, is a steam-generated radiator boiler system. So you have a steam plant in the basement that generates steam that circulates throughout the building and goes through radiators, which then radiate heat into the room. And it's not just the heat from that radiator, because what happens is the heat from the radiator will heat up the wall and every other surface of the room. So all of these areas then will radiate heat as the heat bounces back from that. So you're not heating the air in the room. The air in the room is not a great conductor. You know, all the modern heating systems, you're heating the air and then circulating the air. And it's very inefficient to heat surfaces with air. But it is very efficient to heat air and objects that feel the heat around it from radiation from heated surfaces. So that makes the system less dependent on air movement, although we still try and prevent air infiltration to a certain point. But in reality, as we'll talk again later about the very innovative air handling system in the building, you do need a circulation of air. And in many cases, who's been in an old schoolhouse or an old building that has been radiated heaters and you're in the middle of winter and all the windows are open? The heat sometimes gets to be so much that the windows open and the air circulation through is actually positive. You kind of need that. You know, it's too hot in that sense. And let's go downstairs. Yeah. Walking past the elevators, which we will see the working mechanisms are downstairs. Right elevator on this side, passenger elevator on that side. We're walking past the beautiful library and circulating all of that to get to the messy basement. Let's do that on the way to the sleep room. We're on one side of the basement. to the wood shop. We are now underneath the library. This is all the basement for the new addition section. What you're seeing in progress, and I did warn you that it would be chaotic, is new benches being built, new lighting provided in the old outlets, but this area is going to be the wood shop dedicated to window restoration. The process basically starts off in the back with a steam room where we will build steam shelves. So the sash we remove from the openings will go into the steam room, and that will safely soften the paint which contains lead. Lead is a carcinogen, and it has to be handled very carefully, both for the safety of the occupants of the building, but also for the workers. So the method is that the steam room will soften the putty that keeps the window in place, which makes it possible to remove the glass and reuse it. And it will also release the paint from the sash. Once the paint is scraped from the sash in the softened condition, it then goes to a downdraft table where the rest of the sanding, if needs to be, goes to where the dust can be collected into the filter system without being contaminated into the air. So both of those are secluded rooms in the back. Then the sash make it into this room where sections are replaced with attachment if needed. Joints are put back together again. From here with reconditioned sash, the glass goes back in again. It will go to another section of the building where it will be painted, and then it will go back into position again.
Now, I've seen old windows where maybe a corner has been damaged
Yes.
from excess water.
Yes.
Most of the framing is okay, but a little part isn't.
Yeah. So interesting thing is we have been accumulating over the years old sash from other buildings. Both has been replaced, also the ones that we've made new sash for, as in the Bridge building, for instance. We saved all those old sash. The reason why is we like to save that old wood, because we know the wood would be the same species as used here, and it would be the same amount of yearing, so it makes it very compatible to glue together. So what we will do in the case of that rot is that you take a section out, not just the rotted section itself, but a larger section, and we'll come back to why, but then you put in a new piece and you glue in a new piece in its stead, which we call a Dutchman. And so that with that process you use 80 or 90% of the existing sash, but you're adding to that this little new piece, a little new old piece.
Okay, and you mentioned the Bridge building. That's the Bridge Bar.
The Bridge Tavern.
The Bridge
Yes.
Tavern. People may be familiar with seeing the progress on that.
Correct. In the Bridge Tavern, a lot of the window sash were actually removed before the restoration process began, so all of the sash was not present. And what sash were in very, very bad condition. What we did there was make new sash for the old openings. So the old openings, the old casing was saved and restored, but it was then supplemented with new sash. So the new sash looked exactly like the old, even in the rounded arch tops, but they're actually all new. It's the exception only, that would not be the rule.
Mm-hmm. And is the window work on that building complete now?
It is following the finishing of the interior. So as the finishing allows it, the final steps to the interior is happening as we speak, and probably for the next several months, at the speed of the finishing. This is a vital component, and we anticipate that not only in time, not only will Roxby windows be restored here, but we hope that in time we will be able to help select the clients help on their projects. It'll probably be down the line somewhat. As you can see, we're quite backed up, and we will be for quite a while, but as this process becomes more automated and we get better at it with more people trained, we would like to make that knowledge available to the general public, and we know that both residential and commercial buildings, there is a huge need for restoring those windows in an efficient manner.
Now, the training, would you be doing the training, or how does that work?
So we're hoping to do training in two different ways. I mean, for our own case, we need personnel. So we will be taking on people and training them to do these specific tasks and become very good at that. We also, in time again, hope to do on site a YouTube series of videos that shows exactly step by step how to go through this process. And the thinking about that was we did anticipate, and we might still do some hands-on training, but the efficiency of passing knowledge on from on site to maybe a maximum of 10 people at a time, it's not a very efficient use of time. Whereas in our modern living, as we know, the reality today is that if you need information, you go to YouTube, and you go and look at the very specific information you need for your specific window, for your specific answer. And you might browse further than that if you're interested, but I need my solution right now. And in reality, this is our approach to that whole concept, because the idea is that we're all on a journey through this life. We need information as we go through it. When you need information, you go to somebody who has it, you gather the information you need to solve your problem, and you move on from there. Talking about moving on, we probably shouldn't we?
Yeah, Becca, would you like to add anything to this?
I think he's pretty well covered it at this point.
And will you be one of the workers here?
Yes and no. I will be one of the workers here in the shop part of my time. The rest of my time is going to be helping out with other things. I'm working on the historical tax credit applications that will be done for various Roxby holdings in the future. I'm also helping out with the archival, the inventorying of all the buildings, contents, doing all sorts of valuation things. We have a library full of books upstairs that we don't really know what's there. And we also we've got a great discovery in all the stage scenery backdrops upstairs in the theater. There's over 100 of them, and most of them are the originals from 1916. And so we're trying to figure out exactly what that means in terms of for insuring the building, and also possibly using them to leverage investment in the future. So we have all kinds of things to learn about the building.
Okay, you mentioned briefly tax credits. Would you just say a little bit more about that and how West Virginia is positioned for tax credits?
West Virginia has been kind of behind the game for a long time, not having their own state. Whenever you do historic preservation, restoration projects in local buildings in West Virginia, we did not have our own historic tax credits for historic preservation projects, but the states surrounding us did, so developers would often overlook West Virginia as a possibility for their projects. There's been a huge push for the last couple of years to change that in West Virginia, of which Wheeling Heritage was a major player in seeing that done. And now we have our own historic tax credits for projects in West Virginia, and so that's now why Wheeling is seeing a lot of development of its historic properties. So it's been very beneficial. But also a side note for Friends of Wheeling members to know is that there is also a historic tax credits for residential properties. It doesn't have to be these big commercial properties, but there is some available to your own home if it is listed on the National Register and you want to be doing some work. I think Wheeling Heritage is an organization that you can reach out to learn more about that.
And let me add that people ask, is my house eligible to be on the National Register? Now, the way this works is Wheeling is fortunate in having, a dozen or more National Register districts.
Thousands of properties.
Right, and if your property is listed as a contributing structure in any of those historic districts, your property is automatically on the National Register. You don't have to go through any particular additional steps to make your property eligible for these tax credits and for other financial opportunities. And you can pretty much take a look at your property and see if it would be considered a contributing structure. Something like the new firehouse in North Wheeling would not be. It's new. It doesn't fit the rest of the.
It will be someday, though.
Ah, yes. Has to be at least 50 years old. Is that right? Yeah.
And that's something that you don't have to necessarily lose hope. Most of the National Register nomination districts in Wheeling were done many years ago, 70s, 80s, some even in the 90s. And in some cases, even if your property doesn't meet the 50-year age mark that's required, if your building does have some sort of significance, it can sometimes be added. And if your building was also not considered a contributing property at the time the nomination was done, you can actually make changes to it that would then get it listed as a contributing structure. So you can change the status of your building if you're already located in the district.
Okay, so we're a little bit off on a tangent, so let's get back with our tour. Sarl?
Next thing probably is to talk about the boiler system in here and the heating system and how it's changed over the years. And maybe Jeff, you need to stand a little closer so we can talk to that. And maybe we should just make our way to the boiler room and have a look at there. So I'm going to lead the way. Yeah, sure, we can go this way. Let's follow Jeff, and we'll make our way to the boiler room, and we'll have a discussion about that. So this is one of the many shafts throughout the building. Jeff, and you can tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, what you're going to see here in a little bit is the first generation of forced air using a low-pressure steam boiler system. And what you're looking up at, I don't know if you can see it or not, is a chimney, basically. And it allowed fresh air to come into the building. And if you look behind you, you'll see a bunch of washable, reusable filters. Well, we'll walk to the other side of this wall here, and you'll see what happens from there. But this was the intake to fresh air going into the boiler room that then distributed hot air into the building.
Ooh.
Now this is the original building boiler, and it was actually a dual fuel boiler. It was a coal-fired boiler, but it also had heating oil that it would use to make it a dual fuel boiler. It would basically has a tank inside there with a fire underneath. The tank is basically tubes. The fire is generated, it heats up the water, the top level becomes steam, and steam naturally transfers and seeks its own direction without force, and hot goes to cold and naturally circulates within the building. So this was the first boiler that was put in here.
As you can see, it was made in Wheeling, West Virginia by the Schofield Cowell Company.
Yeah, and you'll find that most things in the building of the Scottish Rite was originally came from Wheeling. Everything from the floor tiles to the electrical systems to the boilers and the like. So that was the first generation. The second generation, this is a recent replacement, but the old one was near identical. So surprisingly, the technology hasn't changed much. It's called a low pressure steam boiler. And it does exactly what I explained over here. It heats a pot of water, water becomes steam, steam conducts naturally forward, and it convects throughout the building. So this, and they're surprisingly efficient.
Speaking is Jeff Morris.
Yeah.
He and his son Jeffrey are the owners of Roxby Development, and they are the ones who are making all of this building rehab possible.
Well, Roxby Development is kind of a multifaceted group, but one of which is to preserve and restore historical properties. This is the 2 of 3 properties that we have on our plate right now, and we'll be bouncing between here and the Carmel Monastery. Some of you, I'm sure, have been to the monastery, and there'll be sister event centers, if you will. So a place for the community to gather for a variety of different reasons. Let's go over here to the, now you remember me mentioning that this was the first generation forced air. Well, see this exchanger here? All those are is old boiler exchanger plates that steam would go through these plates. And this was, of course, jacketed in the years past. And the hot air that came from there would come over here to this fan. See this big fan here? And this big old fan here still works, still turns. We haven't energized it yet, but anyhow, it would take hot air, bring it over to the fan, and then blow it up into the building in 4 different zones. And if you look over here, this old thing that says hands off, well, this is an air controller, thermostatically controlled. And see these little air lines that are up here? Well, those air lines go up to every radiator and to thermostats within the building, and you're talking miles of air lines. And if you see them, they were marked really well. Small lodge, large lodge, cathedral, and banquet hall. Well, it could individually control the heat in each of those zones based on the thermostat in each one of those areas. And what it would do is if it needed more heat, it would call for heat by this variable speed controller over here that made this large fan run slow or fast. So if all 4 rooms needed heat, that thing would be running at a high rate. If they needed just a little heat in one area, it would operate in a low heat. So this building is pretty unique, and it was a state-of-the-art building in its time. And this is what I would call the first generation of forced air, using steam heat. Today, it uses radiator steam heat, and we're relying on radiation only, and this part of the system is not active at this time.
Well, let us very, very quickly, as a teaser, show you, maybe with Jeff's help, the elevator mechanisms. And with that, we'll leave you until you get to the next visitation, which hopefully will show you, amongst others, a functioning wood workshop.
This is a bit of a vault here that still fascinates me, that the age of this unit and the performance is still here. This is the workhorse for the freight elevator. If you can see all this, unfortunately this unit has gone out of date and is not permitted to be used, but there's nothing wrong with it. They just let their license go lapsed, and we have to get a state organization in here to recertify it, and then it'll be active and in use again. So we have a freight elevator here. If you step off to the side, I can't open it up because of the safety devices. It's locked. But this is the old elevator, and if you're old enough to remember going to, let's say, I think Stone and Thomas used to have a elevator that was manually operated. Had a man that sat there in the corner and opened and closed the door, took you to whatever floor you needed to go, and that's the design of this unit here. These doors over here, this is nothing more than an elevator pit for the man elevator. So the man elevator to this building is still in operation, and we had folks come in here and do an inspection on it. They felt very firm that it was in great shape and had lots of years left in it, and it has 100 years of time on it now. So we want to do a couple aesthetic things to that elevator, but nothing too serious, but leave it all intact. And the controls for this elevator are all up in the top floor that are pretty interesting themselves. So this building, while it's got a little bit of age on it, it's been extremely well preserved, because the folks of Scottish Rite who've had this, they were the single owners of this particular building. They maintained it, and I'm very proud to be associated with Scottish Rite. And, realizing that they put their heart and soul in keeping this place in the condition that it is, but now it's time to go on to the next step. So, Scottish Rite, by the way, are still involved here and will be for hopefully forever. But in the course of purchasing this building, part of the negotiation was to keep them present within the building, at least for the next 5 years and beyond. So, they're still here and enjoying the building, but don't have the responsibilities of dealing with some of the things that you see here.
So amazingly, you have now seen about 40% of the basement. Other plans for the rest of the basement, which we won't show today, and I hope to show you later, is amongst others a large plaster workshop, and also made it into the fashion where plaster restoration can be taught, and decorative plaster restoration, replication can be taught. Mostly, again, online is one of our main goals, and we need a large, well-lit space for that. So there is a hall in a meeting hall, actually, in the basement that will suit for that purpose, which is not yet set up. So lots more fun to come, and we hope to show you some more of that in the future.
In the next installment.
In the next installment.
Okay, thanks for joining us today on our Friends of Wheeling tour for January 23rd, 2021. And if you are on our mailing list, you'll get notice of our next tour. Have a good day.